Why do they make investing sound so complicated? Now, this is a question I get all the time from people. I talk to people almost every day who feel so overwhelmed and frustrated trying to figure out investing and finances on their own. They've been looking on the internet, they've been listening to all the podcasts, they've been following all the financial influencers on social media, and it just feels so complicated and overwhelming. And so for today's episode, I wanted to dive into some of my own thoughts, why I think that they make it seem so complicated when it comes to investing, so that you can feel more empowered and maybe know really what's going on behind the scenes and why it seems so complicated in the first place. For those of you who I haven't connected with yet, it's so nice to meet you. I'm Adina here from Immigrant Finance. I am the co-creator and co-founder of Immigrant Finance. I'm an accredited financial counselor, and I'm also an immigration attorney. And I'm super passionate about empowering immigrant families with finances because it has changed the life of my own family. My husband, Mauricio, is an immigrant from Ecuador. And when he came to the US, we struggled for years with finances and money. We had a really hard time figuring out, whether he could have a bank account, credit card, and invest because it was so complicated. It felt so overwhelming, and there was no information we could find specific to immigrants that answered our questions and talked about how immigrants could be taking those financial steps and investing. So when I talk to people and they have felt like it's so complicated, they feel so overwhelmed, I like to tell them my two conspiracy theories why I think that the whole system, the whole financial world makes investing sound so complicated. And they are a bit dark, I want to warn you, but I like to be transparent and real with people. And I think it's important that this perspective gets out there in case it can help anyone kind of read between the lines and see that it doesn't necessarily have to be so complicated and that they can learn about investing too, that you can take things into your own hands and change your life through personal finance. So the first reason why I think they make investing sound so complicated is honestly, I think that the financial system has been built in a way that is perhaps intended to keep certain people out of the system. We know historically the U.S. And the financial system and who has access to wealth has been based on so much inequality, so much racism, and there's a lot of ugly underpinnings to why things are the way they are, why certain people have access to this information, and why certain people have wealth and others don't, right? And if you look back at the history of the financial system, in particular, it was designed to really discriminate and keep out African Americans, Black Americans, for example. If you look at some of the major laws in this country that opened up wealth building for people, Black individuals and Black families were kept out of this system. So, for example, the 1863 Homestead Act, which gave a bunch of free land to people, ended up excluding Black people. And that cost approximately $1.6 trillion in losses in land ownership. The Social Security Act of 1935, which provided unemployment benefits and financial benefits to people who retired over 65, also excluded Black people. And that resulted in over $143 billion of losses for that community. Additionally, the GI Bill of 1944 pretty much excluded Black veterans. That had given funding for veterans to have college education, housing, unemployment insurance. And by keeping Black people out, that cost them another $45 billion. So this is just like some examples of how the laws and financial system have a history of excluding people of color, and keeping them out of opportunities where they could be building wealth. And that in part explains why we have such a major wealth gap in this country between white people and people of color. According to the Federal Reserve Board's survey of consumer finances in 2019, A typical white family owns about $184,000 in family owned wealth compared to a typical black family owned about 23,000 and a typical Latino family about 38,000. So there is this huge difference in wealth and disparities of who has access to this wealth in this family. Another way to put those numbers is that for every $1 that white families have in wealth, Latino families own 21 cents of that, and black families own 12 cents of that. So there is a big history of discrimination and structural institutions of racism in this country that have led to such a wealth gap, going back to some of those laws I mentioned that have been passed and excluded black people, and also ways that the system continues to play out that keeps things the way they are and keeps wealth in certain hands. So when it comes to investing, to bring it back to the question, it can seem so overwhelming because I think that there are forces at play, unfortunately, that have had an interest in keeping out some of these people I've mentioned, of black families, Latino families, from having access to that wealth. So information that's being passed down and shared within white families, within white communities through generations, that's just like secondhand information on how to build wealth, right? Why it's important to get started investing, why it's important to save for retirement, why it's important to have emergency savings. Like these things are talked about in ways that don't get passed down in other communities. So if you are the first in your family to be hearing about investing or even thinking about investing, it's not your fault. And there's a whole history of how this information has been in some ways intentionally kept out and kept away from people of color, and how access to wealth has been blocked. And this is why it's so incredibly important to push back when you hear this idea that investing has to be so complicated, because the actual logistics of opening an investing account and getting started investing and understanding how it works don't actually have to be that complicated. There's just this story that has to be so complicated because, again, this is my conspiracy theory. I think it's part of that like intimidation factor. It's part of that information not being shared with certain communities. And we need to resist that, and we need to step up and do what we each can to share this information with the communities who haven't gotten it. And if you're part of one of those communities, to step into your financial power and say, you know what, this might sound complicated, this might sound overwhelming, but I can learn this, and I'm going to be able to learn how to invest, and it doesn't have to be so hard. And that's just a story I've been told or that's been shared in society that has to be so hard. No, many of you who I speak to who are from Latino families speak Spanish, for example, or many people I speak to from other immigrant groups, other families speak other languages. And let me tell you, if you can speak more than one language, if you speak another language besides English, even if you don't really speak another language, but you grew up hearing it and you understand it, you already are at an advantage that more than a typical American who only speaks English. The reason is because your brain knows how to learn new information and new languages and new ways of speaking about things and understanding things. And that's a lot of what makes investing so overwhelming, because it's like learning a new language. It's a lot of new words, right? They're specific to investing that if you're the first in your family to ever be hearing and you didn't get to grow up, from a young age, hearing those terms, having that wealth passed down, having that knowledge passed down, it's going to feel a little intimidating. But if you have gone through the struggle of having to learn another language, you can do this because you've learned another language before. It's just like learning another language. And it's one of those things where, like, if you keep exposing yourself and you keep looking up the terms you don't understand and just make a commitment to every time you hear a new investing word you don't understand, just go and Google it and look it up. Eventually, those words are going to start to feel normal and you'll understand what they mean. It's just a commitment, and that's part of learning the new language. That's one of the most intimidating parts of investing. Now, the second reason why I think they make investing sound so complicated and this is what I talk about a lot, is that so you think you have to pay a financial planner to manage your investments for you for the rest of your life. Now, this is definitely a controversial a controversial position that I take. Particularly being in the financial field, I'm an accredited financial counselor, as I mentioned. When you have to pay a financial planner to manage your investments because you don't understand it yourself, right? You end up losing a lot of money over your lifetime. The reason is that when you have a financial planner managing your investments, you have to pay them a fee every year to manage those investments. And the fees can sound really small, sometimes like 1%, 2%, something like that, but they can add up over decades of your lifetime, especially if you're investing long term for retirement, for your children's education, for your children's future. They can end up being hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, for example, NerdWallet has a statistic saying that a 1% fee from a financial planner could end up costing you more than $590,000 in investment returns that you could have been keeping for yourself to grow wealth over 40 years. So that's a huge amount of money. That's over $500,000 that you would be losing just because you are paying a financial planner a small percentage every year. So why not just get rid of that and learn how to invest on your own so that you don't have to give up that fee and you don't have to give up that over $590,000 over a lifetime, right? Because think about it, you're also going to have to pay taxes on the money that grows potentially, depending on what kind of account you have and your strategy and all that. But you can learn how to invest. And the hardest part of investing, it's actually not learning how to open the account or fund the account or know what investments to purchase or even developing a strategy. All of that I can teach you pretty quickly through the financial education work that we do in our signature program, Immigrant Finance School, where we really teach our students how to be investing on their own. I can teach you all that, but the hard part with investing is actually about making sure you have the money every month to invest. That is the hard part. It really comes down to budgeting and managing money and systems around money. The reason is because the way you build wealth sustainably over a lifetime, the way you build real generational wealth is by investing consistently every single month, regardless of what's going on, regardless how much you invest. It's not about how much, it's about doing it every single month consistently over a lifetime. It's about time in the market. That is the hard part with investing. And that's something that a financial planner can't necessarily figure out for you. If you want to be building that wealth, you have to learn how to be able to prioritize yourself, how to manage your money, how to pay yourself first, and have a system that works and that is easy and sustainable and isn't gonna, make you have to sacrifice, right? Where you're very intentional about where your money's going, where every dollar is going, you're making sure you're enjoying life now while you're moving your goals forward. That's all about having a system. So don't think that investing has to be so hard, because it's really not. The hard part is learning how to invest. It's having that ability to have the money every month to invest. And you don't need a financial planner for that. What you need is to learn how to manage your money and learn how to get clear about your goals, right? And then have a strategy of what to invest in. So knowing all of this, it really doesn't have to be so complicated to be investing. Like I said, I think there's this idea out there and they make you think that so that certain groups are excluded from the strategies of building wealth. And so that you think you have to pay a financial planner all this money over your lifetime to handle it for you. So make it a radical act of resistance and get started investing today, even if it's $1 a month. I'd much rather you see you investing $1 a month and getting started than waiting until you feel like you've saved enough, because you can start with just $1 and it can be simple and you can do this. We believe in you and we're here to support you. If you have any questions at all about investing, feel free to book a free 30-minute consult with us at immigrantfinance.com/consult. And we can't wait to get started supporting you and getting to know you. Have a great rest of your day.